Welcome to First Responder Friday. It is Friday, and so that's what we do here on our PTSD 911 movie Facebook page. For the last few weeks, we've been having these conversations with leaders in our first responder community. And so I want to welcome you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of this. And if you like what you're seeing and are engaging with us, I encourage you to ask questions, put them in the comments below. And as we can, we will address those questions along the way. And if you could be so kind as to like our page and then share it with your network and with your tribe. It really helps us to get the word out about our film project and what we're doing to tell a story about the trauma and stress and the success that law enforcement, our EMS, our firefighters, uh, our dispatchers, and the important work that they are doing to serve our communities. Today, I am privileged to have with me the the executive director of the Concerns of Police Survivors, Dianne Bernhard. Dianne, welcome to the program today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, tell me a little bit about your background. You have a law enforcement background, right?
I do. I retired about 6 years ago from the Columbia, Missouri Police Department. I retired as their deputy chief, but I kind of grew up in that department. I started when I was very young, about 22 years old, and spent 23 years at that agency.
Wow, thank you for your service. I'm not part of that community, but I want to say thank you just for making that sacrifice, for doing that important job of providing law enforcement and security for that community. So,
I certainly appreciate that. I think still an honorable profession, and I'm really proud of the work and the people that I worked alongside of
sure.
in Missouri. Yeah.
So, what got you connected to the concerns of police survivors? How did that transition for you?
Well, on January 10th of 2005, I was working. I was a sergeant at the time in our agency, and the unthinkable happened in Columbia, Missouri. We had never had a line of duty death in our department, and that night, Molly Bowden, one of my coworkers and friends, was on a car stop shortly before 10 o'clock at night in a fairly nice part of town, and pulled a car over, and the person got out and shot her almost before she had a chance to react. And then when she fell, stood over her and shot her multiple times. We were fortunate enough that that a bystander stopped by and got her radio and called for help. And the first officers there had some medical experience and got an ambulance there pretty quick. But unfortunately, the shots that she took were ultimately fatal. 30 days later, she died from her injuries in February 10th, 2005. And that night, our department lost its innocence. We were used to responding to shootings in our community. We were used to homicides in our community, but we had never experienced that attack being that we were the target of that. And so that was really eye opening for us and devastating. And we didn't know what concerns of police survivors even was. If you don't know the geography in Missouri, we're about an hour and a half north of Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri, and that's where the headquarters for Concerns of Police Survivors is. So we were even within an hour and a half of cops and didn't even know it
You didn't know
existed.
that existed.
Didn't know it existed. But what we saw was that cops came in and helped. And after Molly died, she was married to an officer that was in our agency, and then she had parents that lived in our community that we hadn't met prior to this, but we became very familiar with them. We would have done anything to help that family, anything, and we did everything that we could think of. But what really helped was connecting those parents and Corey, her spouse, with other families that had been through something similar, and with an organization that understood grief and understood what it was like to go through something like a public funeral and the aftermath of that in a community.
Hmm.
So that's how I
So
learned about cops. And
this
when I
kind of
retired, that's what I wanted to do.
so this kind of event that it not only affects the immediate family,
Yeah.
but it affects the broader community as well. How widespread is that effect?
Yeah. So when Molly was shot and killed, obviously our community had never seen anything like that. And the widespread support that came from the community was almost I remember the funeral that day, and I'll never forget, driving in the caravan down from the funeral to the cemetery, and the number of community members that came out and stood alongside the roads and saluted and had flags and showed their support. And I think it, for the first time, solidified to me, even though I'd been a 15-year cop at this point, it solidified to me the amount of community support there really is out there for law enforcement.
Hmm. If you're just joining us, we are talking with Dianne Bernhard. She is Executive Director of the Concerns of Police Survivors. And if you have a question for Dianne at a later point in the program, go ahead and put them in the comments below, and we'll address those as we can in the program. Dianne, what are some of the challenges that families face when their loved one dies in line of duty?
The first thing that the myth is kind of that is out there is that the family members of officers kind of expect this is going to happen because their loved one chose this profession and it's dangerous. But that's really not the reality. First of all, it's just the shock of that it actually happened. Even though that officer went to work so many times and came home safely that day, they did not. So there's shock and there's confusion, and then there's also this public element that happens in a line of duty death that sometimes other deaths that people have that are unexpected, they don't have to necessarily do it in such a public manner. And so that's something that's very unique. And so that's a big challenge in the grief process is everything that you're going through it's on the news, there's pictures of it, it's everywhere you look.
So you really, even as a family member, you can't really get away from it. You can't, it's just everywhere you turn, it's there, right?
Absolutely. And then even the months afterwards, as the widow goes into the grocery store, they talk about how people will look at them and say, "Oh, that's that officer's widow," and just the feeling different and not ever being able to escape it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how does this affect then the agency, who's the officers in it was a part of that camaraderie? I know that many times in law enforcement there's a brotherhood, sisterhood, with officers. How does that affect their fellow officers?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is it's devastating. I don't think, I think the officers are kind of taught throughout their career that when something major happens, you go through it, you fix it, you go on to the next thing. Well, you can't fix this. It's something that happened, you can't fix it, and that's a big challenge. Losing a coworker, sometimes they've lost their best friends. It becomes very real that it could happen to them. So there's that element that comes up. It's a life-altering experience for a coworker to lose an officer from their agency in the line of duty. It will change the officer in
Hmm.
some way.
So on average in the United States, how many law enforcement officers do we lose in line of duty in a year?
On average, our average is 140 to 150 officers per year. That's changed a little bit in recent years with the officers that are dying as a result of the 9/11 attacks back in 2001, where they're dying now from cancer. And so we've had a big uptick in those numbers from those cancer deaths. But typically, it's about a 140 to 150 officers per year.
Hmm. And I would imagine that these officers come from a wide variety of agencies, big, small, small towns, big towns. Is there a big difference in how this kind of death is handled from agency to agency, or is it pretty universal how things are handled?
No, there's really nothing universal about it. And then you obviously have your federal agencies as well, besides the small town and the larger cities. Some agencies, because they've had so many line of duty deaths, they're more equipped to handle at least the aftermath of the filing for the benefits and the funeral. And they've kind of been through it before. But some of these agencies, like ours, which is a medium sized agency in the middle of the country, we had no idea what to do. And that's where, cops can come in and help in those initial days. And then in all cases, even the larger agencies will come in and help with those family members that just need to connect with each other to work through their grief.
Hmm. So, what are some of the causes of death for line of duty? I mean, is this, is it just shootings mostly, or what are some of those causes?
Obviously the felonious cases, the shootings, that's a good percentage of them, but at least half of them are not that. So there's an enormous amount of loss due to car accidents, car crashes, many of which are, um, an officer's directing traffic at a scene and is struck by a vehicle. Those kind of things. We have officers that drown. Um, the illness-related deaths. That's really for 2020. That's what we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about, is those officers that are dying from COVID because of the exposure that they got on the job.
Hmm. And how has that been? I mean, I know there's been quite a few who've passed away
There,
because of COVID.
there has, in our organization, we're tracking that and kind of monitoring those cases to determine which ones of those will be determined to be line of duty death. But right now, we're tracking 133 police officers who have died from COVID-19. Of those, the agencies, 48 of those, the agencies have already said that they're going to be pursuing line of duty death for those officers because it appears that they contracted the disease on duty. And then the other ones are kind of in a period of we're in that educational piece and communicating and trying to determine what's going to happen with those. We've been really fortunate. The Department of Justice has been pretty clear, and they put out a statement saying that if the officer has worked within that incubation period of when the disease would they could have caught that disease, and then they ultimately come down with COVID and die, that they've already said proactively those officers could qualify for line of duty death benefits.
Hmm. So, so how does stress play a role in officer fatalities?
Boy, um, you know what? There's so many ways. When we talk about fatalities, one of the things I didn't talk about was the heart attack deaths, and some of those are absolutely considered line of duty death since the Hometown Heroes Act happened in the 2000s. And obviously, stress can absolutely affect heart disease and such like that. And I have to say, our between sleep issues and stress and nutrition and fitness, our officers are a high risk category, especially right now.
Hmm. It seems like I mean, it's a really dangerous job,
Yeah.
and I wonder, okay, seeing that, has there been a downtick? And you may not be the one to speak to this. Has there been a downtick in recruiting for, for law enforcement agencies?
I can only speak to my personal experience, and I retired about 6 years ago, but it was already down ticking at that point. There was I think back in the early '90s, and I'm dating myself here, probably not great, but in the early '90s when I applied to be a police officer, it was a job that everybody wanted to have. I remember I was a class of there was 600 applicants, and 10 were hired, and you had to have like a full degree, and there was just there was all these it had to be in criminal justice related it was really competitive to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And now if you had ever used any kind of drugs or anything like that, you were just eliminated. But the standards have had to be relaxed because the number of people that are wanting to go into law enforcement it's drastically dropped, and that was in 2014 is my last personal knowledge. That's one of my biggest concerns right now with all the civil unrest and the discussion about law enforcement is how are we going to recruit to replace those that are retiring or those that have decided that this isn't the career for them when it was already hard in 2014. So I feel for those police leaders that are now struggling with that recruitment.
And I'm sure just I have a friend who's in law enforcement here locally, and he's working more, he's sleeping less,
Mhm.
because there's fewer officers out there available for different shifts. And he said sometimes it's a real challenge to work well, and so that it contributes to additional stress, and
Mhm.
it puts stress on the body and the mind, and that can lead to mistakes, and that can lead to accidents, can lead to other things like that that again create this a cause of death, for law
Yeah.
enforcement.
I mean, just thinking about it, if you're even if you're not in law enforcement, you can do the analogy of when you get to work in the morning. If you're going to have a hard meeting or a hard decision to make, it's good that you make it earlier in the day when you're still really sharp, and then towards the end of the day, everybody kind of talks about that mental fatigue, and just kind of take that and compare that to like a 12-hour shift for a police officer. And in those hours, 8 through 12, when they're already tired, maybe haven't eaten, and then they're expected to make a really good decision where, um, and the stress associated with that is just it can be immense, and it's almost no wonder that there's some poor decisions that are being made sometimes, just because we sometimes forget that officers are also human and are subject to those stresses.
Hmm. And I know there's a whole nother cause of death that we haven't discussed, and that's suicide.
Hmm.
And I know that's a huge issue in many first responder communities. And what have you all seen, and what do you do? Anything for these families that of law enforcement officers who are
Yeah.
who die by suicide?
Yeah, so that's a really challenging question and topic, because there are so many of them. There's actually there's not really a one place that we have great statistics capturing the numbers of that, and I hope that that will improve with some recent legislation that just passed. But there's no really good way to track the why behind all these suicides, and but what we noticed anecdotally is that the numbers are even higher than line of duty deaths, and so there's a lot of them. Our office, for the last 5 years, 6 years that I've been here, we'll get calls from families of officers who have committed suicide, wondering what resources are out there for them. And it's a real challenge because there really hasn't been anything for them. But the dynamics associated with that death for the families are different than those that are considered line of duty deaths, because the families of officers who commit suicide often have another layer of grief in there, and sometimes they have a sense of guilt that they might have done something wrong, or shame. A lot of them want to keep it very private versus line of duty death being very public, and so we've always struggled with trying to combine survivors of line of duty death with suicide. So most recently, we're pretty excited that in the very near future, we're going to be able to say, yes, there's an organization for you as well, as one is being formed as we speak. And in the next month or so, I think you'll see a formal announcement. But C.O.P.S is basically has assisted in forming a new organization separate from C.O.P.S. It'll have its own name, its own organization, but they will be able to provide some of that support for families. So we're pretty excited that we're going to be able to say, yes, there is something for you when those families call. And the answer has been that there hasn't been for a
Mm-hmm.
while, for a long
Mm-hmm.
time.
Well, recently I had the privilege of attending one of the workshops that you all host and down in Virginia, and you invited me to come to the Traumas of Law Enforcement training. Is a 3-day event. Tell me a little bit about that and what that does for law enforcement officers and even for their families.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our Troubles in Law Enforcement training is a training that we've been doing for 20 years here at C.O.P.S. And it's funded by the Department of Justice. It's a BJA grant that we host that so officers can attend completely free of charge. And we spend 3 days. And the first day is just kind of about that emotional survival and getting through your career over a period of 20 years and dealing with the trauma that you will deal with, and the other issues surrounded with being involved in police work, like shift work and lack of sleep and nutrition and fitness and all those things. But it's mostly the emotional survival that first day. And then the second day, we talk about line of duty death, and we talk about, we hear from survivors of what helped them and what hurt them as they went through that process. And then we give some real practical advice to law enforcement officers on how to respond if they have a line of duty death. And then day three, we talk about police suicide and potential ways to recognize that somebody is in crisis and how to respond and what resources are out there for those officers.
I know just for me personally, as a civilian attending this event, it was really eye opening, and it was really helpful for me to better understand the stress that law enforcement officers go through, and the challenges, because there were some people there who were talking about different situations they had been in that
Mm-hmm.
created stress and stressful situations, and it was an amazing experience. I want to say thank you for inviting me to attend and being a part of that. Um, do you think that this is something, and this is something I asked some of the people that were sitting at the table with me. I said,
Yeah.
is this kind of stuff taught in the academy?
I think we're getting better. Back in, in the early 90s when I went through it, no, it wasn't. Um, but I can say I think we're getting a lot better. I think the law enforcement profession is kind of embracing a lot more of it, that we need to take care of the officer first if they're going to be able to go out there and do the job, taking care of the community. And they're recognizing the emotional toll that doing this job over a period of number of years that it has on a person. And an officer is just thinking as a police administrator, and an officer is one of your most expensive resources that you have by the time you get them through field training and then you train them. And if an officer walks out the door at 5 to 7 years, you've lost a huge wealth of information and investment, as well as just the common we should take care of people that take care of us kind of thought process. And so I think that recognition piece is a lot better. There's still a long ways to go, but I think it's getting better.
Hmm. I know that COPS organization does a lot. If you go to your website, there's a lot of things that you guys are involved in. I know you're
Mhm.
also involved with the National Police Week. What's involved? What do you do there? I know this year it was different because of COVID. What do
Right.
you guys? What? How are you involved in that event?
Well, sure. So there's a National Police Week Planning Committee that basically hosts all of National Police Week, and we chair that committee and then with several of our partners who host National Police Week. Other big partners that have events at National Police Week are the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund and the Fraternal Order of Police. Also host major events during National Police Week, and we host a conference for survivors there. But basically, our role is the logistics of getting all the law enforcement survivors from across the country and their coworkers, the coworkers of those fallen officers, to into Washington D.C. That week, handling the housing for them, and then getting them to some sessions where they can actually meet up with other survivors that have been through something similar to what they have. And that's when the healing first begins for a lot of them, when they realize that they really aren't alone in this whole process.
You know, there's over the years. Do you know how many law enforcement officers have lost their lives over the past, say, 100 years? Are there numbers going back that far?
Yes, there are numbers going back that far. I don't have them off the top of my head. I know that they can be researched easily through the Officer Down Memorial page. But yeah, there's, I mean, thousands, obviously.
So having the support of other people that have been through that is really important for these families, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's the one. It's just like peer support. You hear law enforcement officers are very familiar with the concept of peer support, either formally or informally. They're familiar with it. It's either like a formal peer support team that they have at their organization. They can go talk to somebody who's been through what they're going through, or it's informally and it's happened. It happens in the shift meeting room, or it happens, unfortunately sometimes at a bar down the road. But that peer support piece really, it's almost the best thing for an officer that's been through something, is to hear from somebody else who's been through something similar. And it works exactly the same for law enforcement survivors.
Hmm. And what are some of the things that you do for these families? What are some of those opportunities that they have to connect? How do they connect with other families?
Yeah, so we offer retreats for our survivors. We call them hands-on programs. And basically, we divide the survivors into their survivor group. For example, we put all the spouses together, we put all the parents together. And this next week, we're doing it virtually, but normally it's in person. We bring all the kids together, and that'll always get you in your heartstrings every single time when you see how many kids are affected by line of duty death. But what you'll find out, and there's other groups too, siblings and fiancés, and there's extended family and adult children. There's 11 different retreats that we do. But what you'll find out, even when you bring these kids together, is COPS it's a sad reason why people get involved in COPS. Obviously, because their officer died, but what they find out after they get together with others is that we'll talk about the grief, we'll work on the grief, but we'll also make it okay to smile and laugh and have a good time again. And what they'll find out at these programs is they really have a good time, and they also work through some of that grief at the same time, because I'm sure that that laughter has a way of healing things. And so we have a good time. So that's one of the ways we bring them together. Obviously, National Police Week is another. We connect with them, oh gosh, through, you know, virtually. We connect them through magazine. At least 6 times a year, we communicate with every law enforcement survivor in the country in some way.
So if anyone's watching and you have a question for Dianne, just leave it in the comments, and it'll show up on my screen, and we can ask you can ask Dianne a question. Um, so what when a family is experiencing this kind of loss, and what are some of the things that you can say to them now, to saying, okay, maybe they haven't heard of cops, maybe, I mean, most families probably have if they've had someone
Right.
lost. Uh, what should their first step be? I mean, what to get
Yeah.
get down that path of healing from this?
Well, the one thing to always remember is that everybody does it differently. Everybody grieves differently, and they may see one survivor or may see somebody in their family that's responding one way, and somebody else is responding another, and they don't understand why. And the reason is that everybody does it differently, and so there's no one stock answer on what you should do to get through it. But one thing that you should realize is that there will be another day tomorrow, and that things look differently tomorrow than it does today. um, if you connect with somebody else who's been through that, you can sometimes get that piece of hope. Like if a new spouse that just lost their husband or their wife can see a spouse that's 2 years out from that and see what they're doing now. That actually that it puts that piece of hope in there that they could be there in 2 years. They may not be there right now, and that's okay. But they could get there by watching somebody else that's been through it and gets there. And so one of the things we tell people is don't say that I understand, because none of us do. We've not ever been in their shoes. So we tell, that's one of the things we teach is don't say that I necessarily understand what you're going through. But at the same time, the one who can probably understand it the most would be somebody else that's just like them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So what's next for the National Cops Organization?
Well, we are obviously just like everyone else in the country. We are dealing with a pandemic. For the first time ever in 35 years, National Police Week the public events were all canceled. And so we did that virtually. And now we're looking at all of our programs that we have coming up through the fall. Right now, our programs are canceled. Our first thing that we have scheduled is in Reno. We have a traumas and law enforcement training scheduled for the middle of July. And that region is pretty open. And so that's going to, as of today, unless something changes, that's going to go as planned. And then we're looking at our August events of starting to do some of those programming. But our biggest question that we're so hopeful that it's going to happen. Right now, we're planning as it is our national conference on wellness and trauma that'll be coming up that first weekend in November, and it's in Oklahoma City this year, in conjunction with the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think in Oklahoma, that's kind of where peer support was born, was during that bombing. So, yeah, so that's our big event. We're excited about the lineup of people that we have coming to present on all topics surrounding law enforcement, wellness, and trauma, and for the family members, which is a piece that we should never forget, is how much having a law enforcement officer in your family actually affects your entire family. It's not just about the officer. So yeah, so we're excited about that coming up in November, and we are planning for National Police Week next year, which is going to be an absolutely huge event because we're going to honor all the 2019 officers that were fallen, as well as the 2020, which those numbers right now are trending about 50% higher due to the COVID deaths.
Wow. So
So we
how many deaths have there been this year altogether? Do you know?
I better not say that off the top of my head, but I do know that we're about 49% up from last year at this time.
Wow.
Yeah, and most of that is related to COVID, although
Mm-hmm.
obviously there's been some recent violence against officers. It's going to trend those numbers up a little bit as well. But we could be potentially looking at least a double number of officers being honored at National Police Week, but likely closer to 3 times amount. So that's a lot of survivors and a lot of coworkers in DC in May of 2021. So
Mm-hmm.
that's on our radar, and that's a lot of planning going for that right now.
And you guys work with every single family, every single officer's family?
We invite every single officer's families to National Police Week. And our chapters, we have 55 chapters around the country. They're not in every state, But in some states that have a lot of loss, there's more than one chapter. But we're pretty much spread across the entire nation. So whenever there's a death, we will respond and meet that family. Usually prior to National Police Week, they will have made, will have already know who C.O.P.S is prior to National Police Week. But if not, we'll meet them there because we're their venue to get to National Police Week and then to see their officers being honored nationally. So yeah, it's every single family, and some of them choose to continue and participate in C.O.P.S programs, and some choose to grieve their own way. But we still will reach out to them and communicate with them indefinitely. Even from the deaths that we have in our database 30 years ago, we still communicate with those families if their loved ones are still alive.
And there's no cost for these families for their involvement with C.O.P.S, right?
No cost, and we never solicit from them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we everything we do, we get through either federal grant funding or through private donors and corporations that support us.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like you're doing an amazing work and important work. What is the one thing that gets you up and to work every day? What really motivates you in the work that you're doing?
I think and I had one of those moments this week, so I'm glad that you asked that question. It's that individual contact one on one with a survivor that is not necessarily in a great place, but you're able to hook them up with some resources or have a conversation, and you can hear and you can see the difference that you make in that person's life, or the difference that C.O.P.S makes in that person's life. And I love the profession that I chose. My dad was a law enforcement officer. I chose it. My husband's a law enforcement officer. Obviously, it's in my blood. And I retired from it because I honestly believe it's a young person's job as well. But there's no greater gift to me to give back to the profession that I dearly love, and the family and these families. You just getting to love on them is just, it's so rewarding.
Mm-hmm. What are some different ways that people can support your organization?
What we'd like to see people do is to go to our website and see what we do, see what's locally in your area, because we're all over the country and there's chapters all over the country too. So you could get involved that way. Go to an event, go to National Police Week, go to one of the trainings, um, look at some of the fundraising events that we have. We have fun golf tournaments. Everything we do, we try to put a fun spin on it because, frankly, the world is so sad sometimes, especially in our world, that we try to put some fun on it. So look at some of the fun events we have. We have like some 25-mile walks over 2 days, which, believe it or not, is fun. May not sound so fun, but it actually totally is. And just look at our website and see what's out there that might speak to you. There's so many different aspects of it. There's certain parts of it will speak to different folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to say thank you for what you're doing for our law enforcement families who have suffered a great loss, and also for those people who are actively involved in law enforcement and helping them with wellness and mental health. And I think what you're doing is so important. And so, as a civilian, I want to say thank you, because I know when I call 911 and for my emergency, I'd like someone healthy to show up and to arrive
Absolutely.
in a healthy manner. Um, I'm going to do my best to come to the conference in November and to be a part of that in some way.
We would
Just
love to have you there. We'll have more conversations there for sure if we can
yeah,
do that.
I think that would be great to be a part of that. What's the best way for someone to get in touch with you guys?
If you go to our website, it's concernsofpolicesurvivors.com or .org. You can go to any of those. It'll hit us. Just Google us, and you can call our office, 573-346-4911, or just reach out, give us an email. We'll always respond to you every single time.
Well, I want to say thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for being on the program today on the First Responder Friday. I think that um, again, what you're doing is so important. And I also want to say just a little shout out. Thank you for your support of and your encouragement for the film that we're working on.
Yeah,
And
I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see what what it comes out to be, and I'm sure that it's going to be a really meaningful, powerful um, uh, film for law enforcement profession, and for people who are not in the profession to understand just how it's just not a simple. Law enforcement is just not a simple profession. There's so many different facets to it. So I'm hoping this film will capture the many different angles that is
Yeah.
law enforcement.
Yeah, that's what we are really hoping to do to tell that story, to tell the story that so that civilian people like me can really
Mhm.
better understand what first responders, law enforcement, and other first responders go through on a day-to-day basis. And so it helps a lot for it and it means a lot for us to have endorsement and for support from organizations like yours to produce this film. So I say thank you.
Well, best of luck to you. I can't wait to see it in its final
Yeah,
product.
I can't wait to either. So, in speaking of the film, we are about to launch a crowdfunding campaign later in July. So, if you want more information about that, just go to our website at ptsd911movie.com. You can click on a link there, and we have. As we launch a crowdfunding, we're going to have some amazing perks that people can get and amazing opportunities to honor first responders. And so we'll talk more about that at a later First Responder Friday. But for today, we've had Dianne Bernhard with us. She is the Executive Director of the Concerns of Police Survivors organization. I encourage you to go to their website, check it out, and support them. Whether you're a volunteer or whether you can make a financial contribution to their organization, I encourage you to do that. And Dianne, again, thank you for joining us today and being a part of the program.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say a really quick shout out to everyone coming up next week. I'm going to have Karen Solomon on the program, and Karen is the co-founder and president of Blue Help Incorporated, and she's going to be here talking about the things that they are working with. And so join us next Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time for the conversation with Karen Solomon. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I have been the host for your program today. Thank you for joining us and for being a part of First Responder Friday. And if you enjoyed this program, please hit the like button and share it with your friends and family and colleagues. And we'll see you again next week on First Responder Friday.